We often assume children understand death the way we do. I'm Lisa Kelly, workplace grief coach, and I help those experiencing loss get back to work while processing their grief. And Miriam Beloglovsky, you're an early childhood educator. You're a professor, you're an author of 10 books. Can you tell us a little bit about your work, Miriam?
Yes, I have been working in early childhood education and child development for over 35 years. And like you said, I've written a number of books. Some of them have been translating in multiple languages and have become sort of like a viral phenomenon, which I think has had a lot to do with many of the big changes in early childhood education. So I'm going to consider that to be the legacy. There were the Loose Parts books. They were a joy to write. Right now, I retired, so I'm no longer a professor of early childhood education. So I spend my time really trying to understand how children think and how they make meaning of the world around them. And that has been most of my passion also throughout my career. But now I have a little bit more of that flexible leisure time. Well, not really to do that. I do speaking engagements throughout the world, although I'm slowing down a little bit. And what else have I done? I've done community organizing, I've done parenting classes, I have done almost everything you can think and imagine in early childhood education. And besides that, I was a newscaster in my previous life. I actually was a weather girl.
We've known each other a little bit prior to this conversation, and what interests me in inviting you to Grief Space today is I work with working parents, and I saw a Substack article of yours on grief and children, and I said to myself, I need to get her. And you graciously accepted our invitation here to become a guest on our podcast.
I'm honored.
Miriam, what's important for parents to understand about how children think about death?
It's interesting because that particular Substack article
Mhm.
I always start with a story. And that was a story with my 4-year-old. It was right after my brother Elik died. And it was one of those very sudden heart attack death that you never really expected.
Right.
And in my own grief, what I had forgotten was how my daughter was perceiving what had happened. So here I am with the best intentions, trying to help her understand what went on and sort of support her. So I said to her, Tio Eli died. Do you have any questions? And she says, is his heart beating or did it stop? And then I said, it stopped. And then she asked, is he breathing? And I said, not anymore. He's not breathing. Then I said, do you want to write him a note? I can take your dictation or you can do a drawing. Of course, she wasn't really writing at the time. And she said, why? He's not going to read it. He's dead.
Of course.
That was such
Yeah.
an eye opener for me,
Yeah.
understanding that her perception of death was very different than what I thought she understood. Here I am trying to make it, normalizing it in a way, addressing her feelings and emotions. And she was so concrete about what she was trying to understand and making meaning that I sort of, my own grief, I forgot to stop and just listen to what she was saying. And here I am, the so called expert at the time, trying to put my own thinking on hers when her thinking was very, very different.
Yeah, it's so interesting that she asked about his heart and his lungs and not his brain.
Yeah.
You were going right to the logic,
I was going
and
to the law and I was also going to the feeling,
right.
the writing, the
Hmm.
sending a message. Here's a way for you to express something. That I forget that children connect everything, their brain, their feelings, their emotions, their social understandings. It's all connected. And it's we adults who begin to separate it. So it was a fascinating moment for me to start understanding. So in this article, I talk about the story and what I experienced. And on Thursday, I'm going to release the what is the meaning behind the thinking.
Right.
Because I think that's the part that we miss. What are they really thinking?
I'm going to link that article within the show notes, and please subscribe, audience, and get the other articles that are subsequent to this
Thank
first
you.
article that she wrote. Oh, your child is a deep thinker. I think children are more deep thinkers sometimes than
They are.
adults. What did her question teach you, Miriam? You were a professor.
What it taught me was to sort of step back and listen. I mean, I have so many stories about children's perception of death and understanding of death and how it's so different than the perceptions that we have as adults. You know, we're grieving, and in our own grieving, we're trying to make meaning in our own way as an adult.
Mm,
You know, a lot of times we attach concepts of heaven or concepts of falling asleep or concepts. You know, we use this language, try to sort of neutralize the deep emotions we may be having. And in reality, when we use those emotions, we may be putting them on children and creating fear. Like when we say, Grandpa fell asleep. You
mhm.
know, it's easier to understand that, except falling asleep is not a permanent thing.
Yeah.
Death is permanent. So the children
Mm,
begin to feel afraid. Well, if I fall asleep, am I going to die? So, what I caution parents to do is to process the information, process what you're seeing, but at the same time, give yourself the time to not respond right away, but understand that children are concrete. I think I was sharing with you that a great mentor of mine, Bev Voss from Roseville Community Preschool, incredible early childhood educator, internationally renowned, great human. She always talked about death and dying to be something you say to children. You don't say, Grandma passed, you say,
right.
Grandma died, because
Mhm.
children have that concrete understanding. She had a cemetery in her preschool, and the children would have a little ritual, which went on for years because it was a mixed age grouping. So the older children taught it to the younger children, and they would find a dead bug and buried it in the cemetery, or a goldfish and buried in the cemetery. Nothing
Right.
big, nothing tremendously
Right.
complicated. But the children sang a song that they made up,
Mhm.
and the next day they came and unburied it to see if he was still there.
Sure.
So that tells you how they have this need to be very concrete about their
Yes.
thinking, very
Yeah.
concrete about what happens to my body.
Mm.
You know, that's really where their curiosity takes them. And I think we try to, and again, I'm not saying don't bring in your religious perspectives of thinking, because that's very much part of your family.
Right.
Just think about the meaning they have and the way you present them for children. And it's not something that just happens with death and dying, is a continuity of that
Right.
conversation. So
Yes.
that was a big eye opener for me.
They need time to integrate that information. They
Exactly.
might have the foundational teachings of spirituality, but when you use the word died, they need to connect that to
Yeah.
the organic. Um, and be careful about these abstract explanations because they just add obscurity when really what the child is looking for is clarity.
It's clarity, and they also very concrete, but they have the capacity of abstraction. But they do it through their own complexity. So when my also linked to my brother Alex's death, my youngest child was about 2. So she never really met him, didn't have an image of him. And but she heard us talk about it, you know, and I had to fly to Mexico with my mom, so she saw grandma grieving, and of course he was her son, and it was a very painful time. And they had never seen my mom cry or crumble the way that she did. So it was a very scary time for them. And I didn't realize, and this is another thing that it's interesting, children take time to process. So you may think that they're okay, and then 30 days later, you'll see the behaviors begin. And you may not connect them to that moment. So, what happened with my daughter about 30 days later, she started asking everybody that she knew, "Are you going to die?" And she would come and ask me, "Mom, are you going to die?" Almost every day. So at the time, she was going to this wonderful progressive preschool called Children's Circle Nursery School. Talented educators, incredible educators. And, I'm still in touch with them, as a matter of fact. And I, went to the director, Tim, and teacher Carol, and I asked, what's going on with Ariel? She's been asking a lot about, am I going to die? What do I answer? And of course, here I am, the expert again, going to and they always said to me, here you're the mother, you're not the expert. That's why we're here for. That's what you want in a school for children, by the way. And they said to me, what do you say? When she asked, are you going to die? I said, well, I tell her, yeah, we're all going to die, but I'm going to be here for a long time, and I'm going to be here. And one of the things that Tim responded to me at the time was, why are you discussing existentialism with your 3-year-old? And I said, what do you mean? I said, you're talking about the bigger picture of death, the existential piece of death. And she's not comprehending any of that. What she wants to know, what's behind her questioning, is who's going to take care of me if you die?
Yeah.
Are you going to be here to take care of me?
Right.
So it's all about her safety. And in my rushness to give her answers, I sort of bypassed that. So I said to him, I said, so what do I do? I just tell her, what do I say? I can't lie to her. That's why I was answering that way. He says, Miriam, she just wants to know you're going to be around. So just say, no, I'm not going to die. And I said, but I'm lying. And what happens if I die? He says, don't worry about it. You'll be gone. I'll take care of it. So that brought it to such a great perspective. He wasn't being rude. He was just addressing what my daughter needed at the time. And she needed me. She needed to know that I would take care of her.
Mm-hmm.
And the moment I reassured her and started saying every time she asked, no, I'm not going to die. I'm here with you. It
She was
ended.
super concerned about her safety.
That's all she
A very
needed.
primitive foundational level of childhood development.
Yeah. And that's what she needed. She needed to just know that I would be taking care of her. So for parents that are grieving, it's always important to sort of, yes, address your grief, be honest about it. I am sad. I miss whoever the person died. I have the memories, and also talk about memories in a way that is more concrete. Let's look at the photos of me with grandma, or with you with grandma or grandpa, or whoever dies. We need to just be there.
And learn to listen underneath what the child is asking.
Exactly. Really listening to those profound moments of what's going on. Don't rush to, we adults tend to compartmentalize, and we say we either teach or we try to fix things. A lot of the times the children just need you to be there. Play is one of the most incredible ways to process grief with young children. Children make meaning of the world through play. Loris Malaguzzi from the Schools of Reggio Emilia talked about the children having 100 languages and 100 more. And he wasn't talking about languages, English or Spanish. He was talking about the way that they represent their ideas, represent their thinking, the way that they make meaning. So art, storytelling, puppetry, dramatic play, block building, drawing, painting, the languages are there. It's just how do we offer them to children and making them available. So in a way, what I was doing with my oldest, when I said, do you want to draw something, I was giving her a language to do that. Of course, around death and dying, I asked the wrong question. You want to write him a message or draw a painting for him? And that wasn't the question. The question was, do you want to draw something about Tio Elik, but for her, not for Elik who had died? That was my need, not hers.
Mm-hmm.
So
Drawing, playing, puppetry, blocks, storytelling, all of those things can help a grieving child express something that maybe they don't even have words yet for, right?
right. And also I think being with them at the same time. Even just playing next to them, that presence of you being there, even though you're grieving, I think being in that moment through play really sort of helps you also as an adult to process the feelings and the emotions that you have. I mean, children are amazing for that. When September 11 happened, and I was at the college at the time, and we had a child development center. And I remember spending so much time at the center because I was grieving as well. That being on the floor with the children sort of grounded me. And I didn't have to have conversations about this with them, but they would build these complicated, beautiful structures with blocks to knock them down and rebuild them again and knock them down. And I understood that at that time, what they were trying to make meaning of were the towers collapsing. They were probably hearing all of this through the media, or maybe even the families talking about it. And we were grieving.
Right.
As a country, we were grieving. And just
9/11.
having that outlet was an amazing thing for the children as well as for us adults.
Right. You shared with me also a story about a bunny.
The
Yeah.
dad went to work for 3 weeks out of town, and that was really hard for the family. So when he came back after all the hugs and the kisses, the next day, my granddaughter, gives him a bunny, gives my daughter a bunny, and then she hugs her bunny. And that was her way of showing family come together again. So a lot of the times, children, in very subtle ways, they give you the messages, we are back together. So that tells you how they make meaning and the cognition, the understanding about the metacognition, thinking about thinking. When they become aware they can think, they begin to represent it in very profound ways. I did get a bunny after a couple of days, by the way, so I became part of the family.
Good
That
for
was
you,
really
Mary.
wonderful.
Integral part of the family you are.
Yes, I was there helping, so I became part of the family. She gave me a little bunny. So notice those little moments that children bring forward. And I think one of the conversations too that we talked about when you asked me about, parents at work and when they have such a hard time grieving. And I always advise families to, the same way they plan a trust, plan on how you're going to support your children through grief. Because at that moment, you will be grieving. So you may need that support that comes forward in those times. Luckily, I had the children's circle, families and children's circles, people to help me. The educators were there for me when I had questions. And they were there. They were very attuned of what was going on. So they were able to support my daughters through this. So just having those conversations ahead of time can be really helpful through the transition of grieving.
Working parent who's already grieving themselves. They're dealing with a child who's grieving, and they're dealing with work. There's a lot of stress there during a time of loss. I always encourage my clients to simplify your life during this time so that you can spend that intentional time with your child and sit on the floor, as Miriam said, play with them, and also seriously observe what they're doing and try to make meaning out of their play.
Right. Notice and just be present. The children don't need you to bombard them with questions.
Mm.
They need sometimes just to have that safe adult be present. So when I talk about routines, I don't say at 8 you do this, at 9 you do this. It's not the time routine that we're so used to. It's protecting that time. So when you're
Mhm.
working, you come home, whatever time it is that those 2 or 3 hours are protected, that your focus is you as a family. And I know that is a very privileged perspective in many different ways, because you probably work with families that may not be able to spend that time together as a family, because there may be crossover times, when
Yeah.
one to stay home, one parent takes care of the children during the day, then they work later at night. I mean, the circumstance, especially with working families, is very difficult. But having the conversation about how do we maintain and survive while still be able to protect that time for us as a family, whatever that
Right.
is, cooking together,
Mhm.
find those moments where you can be joyfully together.
And for the caretaker too, take a little time to educate them about how you are learning to process grief with your child, so there's some consistency there.
And I think those are important, because there's nothing more disconcerting for a child when you have mixed messages, especially in moments of grieving.
Mhm.
So that's why ahead of time, we don't talk about death because we don't want to accept that we're going to die. There's such a
Right.
hard part of permanence.
Mhm.
It's hard for us, the idea
Mhm.
that death is permanent. The
Mhm.
person we love, we're not going to see the next day. We're not going to be able to have a conversation with them. It's hard, but at the same time, when we can plan and be open about conversations about death, when we experience death in our family, how do we talk about it?
Mhm.
And what does it
Mhm.
mean to the children around us? This is the time where you may want to look for the expert to have the questions answered if you don't have them. And not really at the moment when you're grieving, that you don't have the energy to think about it. So have a conversation, have a plan.
Mhm. Tell the caretakers, tell your relatives, tell the
Hmm.
teachers, give them a heads up on how you are handling it. For example, we're going to use the word died in death with our child instead of the word passed or asleep. If that's the route you're taking, make
Yeah.
sure that's consistent so there's no confusion.
And be sure the reasons why. I
Mhm.
believe that children need to have the answer. We don't need to get so abstract. It's Elix's heart beating? No, not anymore.
Yeah.
You may see that the child the next day is using a play stethoscope and going boom, 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 boom to see that their own heart is beating. So getting to that concreteness and understanding is
Mhm.
essential.
Yeah.
That just being present is the most important
Mhm.
thing. And have a support system. And I know, again, we're talking a lot of very privileged situations. When you
Yeah.
have single parents raising a child on their own, and there's
Mm.
not a lot of support system, but who do you
Yeah.
know that can be there? That
Yeah.
can maybe drop off a meal for you so you don't need to
Mhm.
worry. Uh, Create that community with the
Mhm.
people that you know, because these are the hard times, when you're really grieving is when things are really hard. I'll never forget when I was sharing my sadness about my mom transitioning into death, and somebody said to me, "Oh, we don't worry about that, because in our religion, we're going to meet each other in a different life, in a better life."
Mm.
And it's like, okay, that is not my religious perspective. But
Mhm.
regardless, and I did say that, regardless, I'm going to miss my mom today.
What's today gonna bring?
What
Mhm.
is it going to bring? So, a
Mhm.
lot of the times when we put our own perspective of it, we may be denying children their own
Mhm.
emotions, their own
Right.
feelings. Or
Right.
when people say that to somebody, I'm still grieving. I'm still
Right.
sad. I still know that my mom is not going to be there for as long as that's going to be.
Right.
So, I mean, you can say, eventually we may see her in heaven, if that's what you want to say, but throughout this time, we're still going to miss her.
Mhm.
Recognize the moment, because for that child, the child lives for today. They don't live for tomorrow. They don't live for what's going to happen in a
Mhm.
long time. Yes, I may see
Mhm.
mom or grandma in heaven. However, right now I'm grieving.
Mhm.
This is painful for me too.
Mhm.
Um, that's when I bring in a lot of photos and have conversations about memories, but I make the memories concrete, because
Mhm.
memories can also be very esoteric and very abstract for a lot of
Right.
children.
True.
So the concreteness comes, a lot of the times I suggest plant a tree together
Mhm.
that you
Mhm.
can go and say, this is grandpa's tree,
Mhm.
a place where you can gather in and honor the person. Sometimes
Right.
that act is enough for a child to feel that. But more important
Mhm.
is listen to what they're saying. Another thing I was,
Mhm.
which is releasing next week on this series on death and dying in young children in the Chronicles for Children's Thinking, is the idea of age. We have this idea that old people die, and children accept that.
Mhm.
But what happens when somebody young dies, or somebody their own age dies?
Right.
Then they start questioning their own mortality. And
Mhm.
that is a whole different, maybe I'll write another article about this.
I think that'd be great.
That is a whole other conversation about
Mhm.
I'm vulnerable. They begin to realize the vulnerability. If somebody my own
Mhm.
age can die, can I die too?
Mhm.
And you may see behavior start showing up in ways that you don't expect it, testing the limits to see if they're going
Yeah.
to break or not.
Mhm.
Swinging high, climbing. That's what you may start seeing, because they're testing their own body's capacity and their own body's ability to see, am I going to break? Because if this child died, am I going to die too? So a lot of the
Interesting.
times behaviors show you what is happening. And instead of seeing them as, oh, they're so challenging, I keep telling them they can go up the slide. I never understood that. And this child just keeps going up the slide. Put a rope, let them go up the slide, because they're testing something. And a child who may be grieving, they're testing, am I going to fall? Am I going to hurt myself? We just need to see them as capable and competent. And a lot of the
Mhm.
times they say things that I go, how come I didn't think about that? So they show us a lot.
Yeah.
I learn a lot from them. I learn
Yeah.
a lot from the children that I have watched grow. I had a little boy he started, I knew the mom, she was one of my students, and she was pregnant with him. So I knew this child in utero, let me just say that. And I
Right.
watched him grow for years and years and years. And one day, when he was in toddler group, he came in and he always wore a dress. He would come in into the dramatic play area and put a dress.
Right.
And then he would put on his belt, the tool belt with the hammer and the screwdriver.
Yeah.
I started thinking, why is he doing this? What is behind it? And he came to realize that he's lived with only women,
Okay.
and he had seen the women use the tools. So he was
Right.
sort
Sure.
of making sense of his own gender through his
Mhm.
dramatic play. I can wear
Mhm.
a dress, I can still use a tool. I can wear
Right.
high heels, I can still wear tennis shoes. So it was just a process that he was going through. And I think the
Yeah.
same is true for death. They
Mhm.
they try to make sense and make meaning in the
Mhm.
representation, um,
Mhm.
in their representations, either dramatic play or art.
We try to protect our children, don't we? And we try to also protect each other as adults in these developed countries, as in the US where we live. And in more primitive countries or third world countries, they are still doing it more organically.
Yeah.
They are the children are experiencing this at a very young age, that it comes to no shock or surprise or trauma to them. So we need to, rein in our protective instincts and just trust our gut on the child will learn this if we
Yes.
organically incorporate that in their life.
And be genuine about your feelings. You know, if you're
Yeah.
sad, say I'm sad. If you need to cry,
Right,
cry. It's
right.
okay. We always trying to hide and put up a front. Children
Yeah,
perceive that.
they do. And they learn it, and it continues generationally to mask and cover up and look polished. And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's very cultural in many ways. My
Hmm.
mom was like that. I don't think I ever saw my mom cry.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's like, how do you even hold it together?
What would you say to a parent who's constantly looking for the right answer?
I think I would say trust your instincts. Be together, be present,
Hmm.
be genuine. I
Hmm.
would probably spend time either drawing or painting with them. Um, Sand play, a sand table, it's wonderful. Clay, I would probably bring clay and do clay, not Play Doh, clay, the real earthy, get your hands dirty type of clay. And
Good
just
stuff.
just spend time doing that, because I think a lot of the times parents don't need another expert telling them do this and do that.
Oh,
What they need is
true.
somebody present. Trust your God, trust your instinct, be genuine. Children need to know that you care enough to trust that they see your tears and understand
Hmm.
them.
Yeah,
Don't hurt
yes,
them, but be mad. Say, I'm
yes.
so mad right now. It's okay. you
One
know
of the best ways we can show them how important they are
hmm
is to slow down and just take notice, communicate, let them talk, do a lot of listening.
yep. And in those moments when your feelings are overwhelming, they also find that you figure out ways to calm. That's a learning in itself. When you are mad, but then you figure out a way to deal with those big feelings and emotions.
Yes.
It's the greatest lesson for children
Mhm.
to have. And it's very helpful in moments when you're grieving to be able to do
Yes.
that.
Miriam, thank you
You're
from the bottom
welcome.
of my heart for helping me see grief through the eyes of a child much clearer. I will definitely take that into account when coaching parents in the workforce who are grieving the loss at the same time caring for their child and trying to protect them from the pain of loss. Thank you
Yes.
for being here on Grief Space with me today. And
I
I want people to read that Substack article. It will be in the show notes. I really would like for you and I to get back together on subsequent Substack articles because there's such rich content in here. How can people work with you, Miriam?
I do have a website. It's called playfultransformation.com. So I can be reached through that, or I can send you all of my links right after this conversation. They can send me an email, Miriam at playfultransformation.com. I am releasing a new studio. It's called Revisiting Journey Studio, where we're going to be doing some coaching work with educators and eventually families. I'm hoping to do a lot more work in Spanish because that's my native
Oh,
language.
great.
So if there's any Spanish
Great.
speakers, they can call me and contact me.
It's
And I'll
wonderful.
send you all my links, Facebook, the Chronicles of
Yes.
Children's Thinking on Substack.
They will be in the show notes, audience. And audience, thank you for being here on Grief Space. Until next time, I'm always here to help you be the boss of your loss.